In 1937, the city of Munich prepared for an event that would symbolize far more than the opening of a new building. The inauguration of the Haus der Kunst was presented as a cultural milestone, but in reality, it marked a turning point in how art would be controlled, displayed, and defined under the rule of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party. The building itself stood as a statement. Its architecture was imposing, symmetrical, and deliberately traditional. There was no room for experimentation or abstraction. Every column, every hall, and every detail reflected a vision of order and permanence. This was not just a museum, it was a declaration of what the regime considered acceptable culture. On the day of the ceremony, crowds gathered in large numbers. Officials, artists, soldiers, and civilians filled the streets and lined the entrances. Flags bearing the swastika were displayed prominently, turning the entire area into a stage for ideological performance. As dignitaries arrived, the atmosphere was one of celebration, but also control. Every movement appeared organized, every detail carefully arranged to present unity in strength. Inside, the exhibitions reinforce this message. The artwork displayed focused on themes of heroism, rural life, physical perfection, and loyalty to the nation. These pieces were chosen not only for their style, but for their alignment with the ideals promoted by the regime. At the same time, modern art was being condemned elsewhere, labeled as degenerate and removed from public spaces. The opening of the Haus der Kunst was therefore not just about showcasing art. It was about defining it, restricting it, and using it as a tool of influence. Speeches delivered during the event emphasized the importance of cultural purity. Art, it was said, should reflect the spirit of the people and the strength of the nation. These words echoed through the halls, reinforcing a message that extended far beyond the walls of the museum. The audience responded with applause, but within that response lay a mixture of genuine belief, social pressure, and the quiet understanding that dissent was not an option. 2 years later, in 1939, the focus shifted to the capital. In Berlin, preparations were underway for one of the largest public demonstrations of unity and power. The May Day celebrations, tied to International Workers' Day, had been transformed into a massive display of loyalty to the state. What had once been associated with workers' rights had now become a carefully orchestrated event serving the goals of the regime. From the early hours of the morning, crowds began to fill the streets. Workers, families, and officials gathered in organized formations. Banners were raised, music played, and the sound of marching feet echoed through the city. The scale of the event was immense, designed to impress both those in attendance and those who would later view the footage. Parades moved through Berlin in precise formation. Columns of participants marched in unison, their movements synchronized to create a sense of discipline and unity. Floats and displays highlighted industrial strength, agricultural success, and national pride. Each segment of the parade told a story, not of individual lives, but of collective identity shaped by the state. High-ranking officials observed from decorated stands. Among them, once again, was Adolf Hitler, whose presence was central to the event. As he addressed the crowd, his speech focused on unity, labor, and the future of the nation. The message was clear. Every individual had a role to play, and that role was defined by loyalty and service. The crowd's reaction was overwhelming. Cheers, raised arms, and chants filled the air, creating an atmosphere that was both electrifying and intimidating. For many, participation was expected. Attendance at such events was often less about personal belief and more about visibility. To be absent could raise questions. To be present was to blend into the collective. Propaganda played a crucial role in both the Munich ceremony and the Berlin rally. Cameras captured carefully selected angles, focusing on smiling faces, grand architecture, and moments of apparent unity. These images were later distributed to reinforce the narrative of a strong, harmonious society. What was not shown was just as important as what was. There were no images of dissent, no signs of fear, and no acknowledgement of those who opposed the regime. Behind the spectacle, daily life continued with an undercurrent of tension. While public events projected confidence and order, many citizens navigated a more complicated reality. Restrictions on speech, surveillance, and the consequences of opposition created an environment where caution was essential. Conversations were measured, and trust was often limited to close circles. The contrast between the grandeur of these events and the private experiences of individuals highlights a central aspect of life in Nazi Germany. Public displays were designed to unify and inspire, but they also served to reinforce control. They created a sense of belonging while simultaneously discouraging deviation. As 1939 progressed, the tone of these gatherings began to take on a different meaning. The world stood on the brink of war, and the messages of unity and strength carried an added weight. The same crowds that celebrated in Berlin would soon face the realities of conflict, uncertainty, and loss. Looking back, the footage from these events offers more than just a record of ceremonies and parades. It provides insight into how power was presented and maintained. The opening of the Haus der Kunst and the May Day rally in Berlin were not isolated moments. They were part of a broader effort to shape perception, influence behavior, and define the identity of an entire nation. Today, these images serve as a reminder of the role that culture, spectacle, and messaging can play in society.